Hello and welcome to Just Check's ship orientation video. As you might know, I'm a huge ship enthusiast and I do have some experience working on board the biggest and most beautiful cruise ships for about 10 years. And just to make things clear, I was a photographer and later on stage staff member in one of the theaters on board, so nothing really major. By no means am I a professional, so take all this information very lightly. I did always get myself into safety drills and some fire protection teams as well. Since I can't get myself back on board ships, my passion transferred to various ship games, regardless if these are floating on the water surface or through the space. Therefore, I feel like a video like this can help my dear community understand me better when I start throwing some ship terms around like crazy. Before we dive into all the technical stuff, I just want to make one explanation briefly, and that is the difference between the ships that most of these things will apply to, and those would be seaworthy ships and then river ships and also spaceships. But there's a big difference. Obviously spaceships, I don't even have to touch those because we don't really have them that many, right? But who knows, maybe in near future, or especially if you're playing games like Star Citizen, for example. But when it comes to something that you can see every day, either on the internet or around you if you're living by the body of water, is seaworthy ships and river ships. So basically the biggest difference between that you can always notice is the bow of the ship is completely different. One is made to cut through the waves and therefore is much more difficult to design and build, and this one is obviously seaworthy because that's where we have a lot of waves. And the river ships, they're pretty much flat at bow of the ship, like at its front, which makes them not really a viable choice if you have any motion in the ocean. Now keep in mind one thing, seaworthy ships can be used in rivers and lakes with no issues whatsoever. So in order for me to explain the basic ship orientation, which would be sides of the ship, you need to understand that these are always related to you standing facing forward to the bow of the ship, to the front of the ship. And therefore port would be your left hand side of the ship, starboard would be right hand side of the ship. Forward is front of the ship, also sometimes known as bows, and aft would be back of the ship, aka stern. Then we get to the navigational lights. So red light is always on the port side, green light is always on the starboard side. What's really important about this is that the lights need to be at the furthest end of each side, which will help other ships determine how wide the vessel is. Then we have white light, about 1 meter or higher above the bow of the ship. We have white light at the stern and optional white headlights. Radar is another extremely important part of the ship navigation, and nowadays all ships should have radars and their names, which other radars can pick up. Those come with the basic information about the ship, which help the navigation in general. Okay, so this brings us to the next topic, which is ship safety. And one thing that I have to say right away, please know your ship. But let's start with this. So emergency exit routes. These are lifesavers. I can't stress enough how important this is. It saved my life more than once. You always need to know at least 2 ways out of the area where you are in case of an emergency, or have someone around you who does. It's usually a crew member. Most of the big ships also have multiple watertight compartments that are divided by watertight doors, also known as killer doors. Once engaged, these doors can hardly be stopped. There are many unfortunate cases of people trying to squeeze through these doors, being cut in half or losing their limbs. The reason for this is very simple. You can't really afford to lose possibly thousands of lives because of one that is left behind. This is brutal, obviously, but it's the reality of the accidents at sea. For this reason, guests are almost never allowed to be under the water level, and crew is always well informed and trained to escape certain compartments before the doors are closed. If you don't know some cases of this that you can research, like the most common ones would be recently Costa Concordia. This is literally what happened to her. And the most, well-known would be the Titanic. Ship crews also have secret word phrasing that help them basically maintain crowd control and state of chaos during the emergency events. So you will most likely not know what these words mean. I can tell you those come in different ways, like for example Alpha, Bravo, Delta, or you can have something like falling star, or it doesn't have to be, one word always. And you'll be surprised how many of these terms exist on each ship, but I can give you like several reasons why there would be a phrase word such as fire on board, flooding, collision, there might be a death case, there might be a terrorist attack. So all of these have their different word phrases that will be announced on public announcement systems for crew to start reacting and doing their duties, and to maintain the calmness of all the guests because the last thing you want is panic attacks. With that explained, I would move to our next topic, which would be common terms that you might hear very often on board, especially cruise ships. The first word I would use is a deck. Simply said, it's a floor on the ship. Some cruise ships come with massive amount of floors, 14 or even 18 floors. For an example, I would give Royal Caribbean's Oasis class ships. They exactly have 18 decks above and under waterline. So its height is a total of 72 meters above the water level. The next term would be crew or staff. In current day and age, it would be equivalent to employees of the company. There is a difference between crew and staff members. Staff is basically higher level than crew. On board cruise ships, we will commonly see them with the stripes on their uniforms, and usually all the staff members are allowed to walk around guest areas, while only some crew members are actually allowed to do that only during the working hours. On board military and some older ships in general, you can also hear term hands, as in all hands on deck. This basically means all crew members should be at their positions and start doing their duties. The next one is mess. This simply said is feeding area on board. And then we have staterooms and cabins, and those are terms for guest and crew living quarters on board. Then we have a bridge. So a bridge is a point from which captain and his crew, and mostly his officers, are steering the ship. This part of the ship is usually the one with the most visibility. It often extends widely to both port and starboard sides of the ship. It's very useful in extremely tight situations such as Panama Canal, for example. Then we have terms master and master stations. It's something you should hear whenever you board a vessel for the first time. To master is basically swiftly move to the designated area, usually master station. There are predetermined areas for the abandoned ship situations, which should allow the crew to transfer passengers and then themselves to the rescue boats and drafts as fast as possible. Okay, so let's get to some more technical terms that you might hear as well. So the first one I chose is keel, which is the bottom line of the ship, usually the first one in the construction process. You've certainly heard the term laying down the keel. Also usually used for the ship balance. It comes in various shapes and sizes that directly depend on the ship shape and its purpose. Then we have, on the most ships, the biggest part of it, which is called hull. And it's the main part of the ship. It's lower side, basically, and it can be open. And if it is, these are called dinghies, or closed, which would be like covered with probably wood or some other material, which in that term is called deck. Then we have beam, which is the width of the ship at its widest point. The next one would be draft. It's basically the vertical distance between the water and the deepest part of the ship underwater. This should not be confused with depth, which is the entire depth of the hull. So part of that is actually above the water. The next one I would go with is draught, which is a part of the ship that is underwater. This part may vary on the same ship. So for example, it will be much bigger if you have a lot of cargo or passengers on board. So you will see like different amounts of ship basically being underwater at certain times. And then we go to the helm of the ship, which in essence is a steering wheel, and it's connected to the next one, which is a rudder. Rudder is a device at the stern of the ship, underwater, and usually behind the propeller. It is used for steering of the ship and is, as I've said, directly connected to the helm. This one is most hated one, probably on board cruise ships. It's called a stabilizer. It's kind of funny. It's stabilizer, but it comes in pairs. It's basically a winglet or a fin attached to the bottom of the hull. These are usually retractable on larger ships. They don't have to be though. Its purpose is to stabilize the ship, and the way it does it is the winglets are actually softly rocking the ship side to side to make it feel more natural. The reason people hate those is you will often hear, if you're having a cruise, for example, and it's not the smoothest sail of your life, the captain will usually explain that one of the stabilizers or both are not functioning properly. These are also often used as an excuse not to dock to certain ports, even though they're the reason why you have smooth sailing. Most of the times passengers will not like hearing about those. The next one sounds a little bit piratey to me. Yarr. It's gangway. So gangway is the current exit from the ship. It's usually somewhere in the middle because of the least amount of motion. It can be set up at the water level or much higher, like at the port level entry. Then there's a porthole. I think a lot of people actually know what it is, but to explain, the modern ships mostly have windows above the water, but crew members and a lot of areas in the ship are most of the time underwater or at some point under, sometimes above it. And in these situations we have portholes. So porthole is basically a round window that you can see at the bottom of the ship, so obviously they can go under or above the water level. Now the funny thing is, on board cruise ships, crew members who have portholes are considered lucky, so not everyone has a window. But at the same time, even though it's a window in your own room, you are not allowed to open it or close it. And when I say open or close, you cannot really open a porthole. It would break it. It's watertight, but it has a cover that can only be opened if the ship management, usually captain, allows it to be. So if there's a rough weather coming, all portholes will be closed. Not sure if you guys have heard about the mooring deck. You might have. That was something that was very surprising to me when I got on board. Mooring deck is probably apart from the engine room, is probably the most dangerous place on board. All the ships are basically connected to the land in the port using ropes, and the process of basically attaching the ship to the port with ropes is called mooring. And mooring decks are those decks where you see all the ropes and all the machinery that is used to, tighten the ropes or whatnot. But even on the smaller ships, you have a mooring deck, which is where, that's why you need to know all the knots and whatnot. So yeah, so mooring and mooring decks are places where you don't want to go unless that's your job. I'm sure I missed quite a few that I could not really think of off the top of my head, but for the end I left the anchor. And it's kind of funny. So obviously everyone knows what the anchor is and what it's used for. I'm not sure everyone understands how modern anchors actually function. So basically the anchor is a very heavy kind of a weight that usually has several hooks on it, and you drop it. Well, back in the days you would have crew to drop it off the ship, and it would reach the sea bottom, the seabed, and therefore make the ship drift and stop. Modern ships have this automated most of the times, so the anchor will basically through the mechanical system go down to the bottom and then do the same thing. It's usually not the weight of the anchor that stops the ship, it's the shape of it. That's, I think, something that is very misunderstood. Also, even for the cruise ships, for example, these things can get stuck, and I personally had a situation somewhere in Nova Scotia where our ship just could not get their anchor back. And mind you, these ships have multiple anchors, so it's not really, it's a big of a deal, but it's not that big of a deal. So in the end, we had to release it. So this would conclude all the terms, and words. And I hope this was helpful for some of you. I would actually like to finish this video with something rather interesting that I think not a lot of people, even those who are ship enthusiasts, know. And that is, ships are usually built in pieces, especially those those massive cruise ships, and I'm not talking like top to bottom, I'm talking like forward of the ship, you know, and then a couple of middle parts and then the back of the ship, and these are built in different dry docks. So dry dock might be another one that you guys don't know. So that's basically where the place where you can have the ship in the dry area and then you can fill it up like a pool with the water and eventually drop the ship into it. And once all the parts are completed, the ships are usually being welded so that, you know, they become one piece and they are off for their maiden voyage. Now, most of the times these shipyards are in the places where a bridge or two are in the way of the ship to get on its, you know, first voyage, and they would never come back there. So in order to avoid this and not hit the ship, which might it happened a couple of times, they need to alter their speed at a certain point so that the ship actually goes lower into the water and just enough to pass through the bridge and then maintain their regular speed, which is almost like a ship ducking down. And another interesting thing is the ship that is just released from its construction site will usually have very, very limited crew, basically ghost crew, but then also it will have a lot of contractors on board, such as designers, you know, and construction workers that will finalize all the details before the ship actually gets the first real major voyage with passengers. And that would be it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something new. And yeah, if you have any other questions or you caught some of my mistakes or something was not explained properly, you can either ask in the comments or you can check the links down below. We have a Discord server with a lot of people who also are sharing my passion, and I am always happy to engage into conversation about ships. Also, I'm now streaming on YouTube regularly, so you can hop over and ask whatever you want, and I might or might not have the answer. Anyhow, have a great day, take care, bye bye.